hear something that makes them feel good, that makes them feel at ease. And so we have to be people who don't look for illusions. We have to be people who prefer the truth. And so that can hurt sometimes. When people tell you the truth, it can hurt. It can hurt your feelings. It can make you feel uncomfortable. But the alternative is worse. If someone tells you lies all the time, maybe you'll feel good, but at the end of the day, you're going to be in a worse place. What if someone tells you lies your entire life and you feel good your entire life, but that path leads to hell? What is the point of that? You may feel good about yourself, but then you end up in hell, so ultimately your end result is bad. And this is something that's important in Christianity as a whole. We must be careful that we aren't preaching illusions or preaching things that make people feel good, but that we are preaching the truth. And it goes from both sides. The preachers have to preach the truth, but then the people also have to receive the truth. Because if you have a preacher who preaches the truth, what may happen is that people will get mad. And maybe they'll never talk to that preacher again. Maybe they'll go to another church or something to that effect. But, so it's on both sides. The preachers have to preach the truth.
Amen.
And the people who receive it need to receive the truth. It's more important for us to hear the truth than for us to not be offended. It's more important for us to hear the truth than for us to not feel good about ourselves. That isn't important in the long run. And so we must be people who are willing to hear the truth. And people who are open to the truth. We must be careful that we haven't changed Christianity so that we're forcing the preachers to preach illusions or things that make us feel good. And the same thing is true in parenting with our children. We have to tell our children the truth. Sometimes they may not like it. Sometimes they may cry. Sometimes in the supermarket, if you tell your child the truth, they may throw a fit, and you'll be embarrassed when people look at you while they're crying. But we have to always choose the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it may make us. And so we have to be people who tell us the truth. If we don't tell our kids the truth, no one's going to tell them the truth.
Amen.
Because this world has their own agenda, they have their own incentives, they have their own goal for your children. And so it's important for us to take a stand and tell our children the truth, no matter how difficult it may be or how it may make them feel. In the end, it's more important to tell them the truth. Now let's move on to a passage in Lamentations, chapter 2, verse 14. I can go and read this one. So it says, "The visions of your prophets are false and worthless. They did not expose your sin to ward off your captivity. The prophecies they gave you were false and misleading." So here in this passage, it's talking about the prophets not exposing sin. And what's the result of the prophets not exposing sin? It leads to the captivity of the people. And this is something else we see in the church today. Prophets, preachers, they're not in the business of exposing sin. And what you see is Christians being slaves to sin. You see them still being captive to sin. Because the prophets aren't exposing sin. And it's not acceptable for them to expose sin. You get in trouble if you expose sin. And so it's important for us to be a people, as Christians, where we expose sin, where we shine a light on sinfulness, so that people can turn away from their sin. And the same is true for parenting. It's important for us to expose the sin in our children's lives and bring them to the truth. Because maybe it'll make them feel bad if you expose sin to them. But what's the alternative? If you don't expose sin, then they'll live their lives as slaves to sin. They'll live their lives in captivity. Because when you see your sin, that's when you realize that you need a Savior. And that's when you turn away from your sin and turn to Jesus Christ. So the second thing that I wanted to talk about today is that we should be a people that expose sin. And we should be a people that teach our children about sin because no one else is going to do that for us. Moving on to Ezekiel chapter 22, verse 26. It says, "Her priests do violence to my law and profane my holy things. They do not distinguish between the holy and the common. They teach that there is no difference between the unclean and the clean, and they shut their eyes to the keeping of my Sabbaths, so that I am profaned among them." So here we see something similar. We see that they do not distinguish between holy and common, between the holy and the common. And it says that they have violence to my law, or in the modern sense, violence to the Bible. And so what you see is, what they're preaching is that there's no difference between the unclean and the clean. Again, that applies to this generation, where people teach that nothing's wrong with anything. People don't speak about sin. They don't distinguish between good and evil. Everyone just does whatever they want, basically. And so we have to be a voice in this generation.
Amen.
Where in the world teaches that there's nothing wrong with anything. We have to be a voice that distinguishes between the clean and the unclean. And we need to do that in our children's lives as well. We have to help them understand the difference between what is good and what is evil. And we are in the very important position to do that. And so the main point of this message today is that we as parents, as Christians, need to be willing to tell the truth. We have to be willing to tell the truth. And as children of God, we need to be willing to receive the truth as well. So don't choose illusions over the truth. We must be people who expose sin, and we have to distinguish between the common and the holy. So those are the three main points that I want to talk about today. And then moving on to Ezekiel chapter 3, verses 17 through 19. Could someone please read this passage?
Son of man, I have made you a watchman for the people of Israel. So hear the word I speak and give them warning from me. When I say to a wicked person, you will surely die, and you do not warn them or speak out to dissuade them from their evil ways in order to save their life, that wicked person will die for their sins, and I will hold you accountable for their blood. But if you do warn the wicked person, and they do not turn from their wickedness or from their evil ways, they will die for their sins, but you will have saved yourself.
Amen.
Okay, so this is talking about the responsibility of the prophet Ezekiel. And basically, his responsibility is he needs to warn people about their sin. Whether they accept it or not, he has to do his responsibility and warn them about their sin. And the same thing is true for parents. We have to tell our children the truth, whether they accept it or not. Once they grow older, once they are physically more mature, they're going to have to make their own choice. But what's important at the end of the day is that we have to make sure we do what we need to do.
Amen.
We have to tell them the truth. We have to tell them the right path. And what they decide in their lives is ultimately up to them. And our hope is that they will choose the right path. But it's important for us to do our responsibility. It's important for us to do what we are responsible for doing. And so it's our responsibility as parents to be the primary people who teach our kids to go in the right way. It is our responsibility, and it's a very heavy responsibility. It's a very important responsibility. And we shouldn't let that slide. We shouldn't let it go. We must be responsible for bringing our children in the right way. And no matter what happens in the end, we must hold strong to the teachings of Jesus Christ. No matter what direction our children are going, we just have to make sure we teach them the right path. And then they have to make the decision ultimately up for themselves. And I want to close on one last passage from Matthew chapter 10, verses 34 through 36. Could someone please read this passage as well?
Do not suppose that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be the members of his own household.
So this isn't a very nice verse. When we're talking about parenting, we're talking about having good families. But what this verse is talking about is it's saying a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be in their own household. So why would Jesus say something like this? It seems counterintuitive because we see in the scriptures in several places it talks about unity. But the important thing that we need to understand is we should be unified as Christians, but we shouldn't be unified at the expense of righteousness. We shouldn't be unified at the expense of following God. We shouldn't be unified where light and darkness are trying to come together, because light and darkness have nothing in common. And so the reason Jesus said this passage is because Jesus' focus when he was on earth was preaching about eternity. And the people that wanted to follow after Jesus had to take up their cross and follow after him. So our focus should be similar. So Jesus' focus was the kingdom of heaven. And basically what he's saying is, if you are following after the kingdom of heaven and your family isn't, you have to still follow after the kingdom of heaven. You must value or give precedence to the kingdom of heaven over your family. And so if there is disunity, if your child decides to go another way, you have to hold on to the kingdom of heaven. And so that could create this unity in the household. But we have to understand as Christians, what we have been called to is to follow Jesus Christ no matter what. So even if our kids go another direction, even if our parents go another direction, we have to follow after Jesus Christ. It's not the most important thing for there to be unity in the family if that unity is a result of conforming to this world. So it may be our instinct to feel bad if our children were to go astray. And then our inclination is to try to justify their behavior. But our focus shouldn't be necessarily on holding the unity of the family. But instead, our focus should be on following Christ no matter what it takes. At the end of the day, we should ask ourselves the question of what are we aiming for? Are we just aiming for a temporary, happy family life in this world? Or are we aiming for heaven? Are we aiming for following Jesus Christ no matter what it takes? And that should be our focus. No matter what we do, our focus should be to follow after Jesus Christ. And so we've spent several weeks talking about how to be a good child, how to be a good parent. And no one's perfect. I'm not standing up here and trying to say I have it all figured out. But what we need to do, first and foremost, is to understand that the most important thing is that we are a good child of God. That we are willing to follow God no matter what. No matter what the cost is, we are willing to hold on to following after God our Father. Because that's the most important thing. That is what we have decided to follow in this world. We have decided to follow after Jesus Christ. And that should be our aim, first and foremost, to be good children of God. And so I hope this series has been a blessing for you. And none of us are perfect, but I ask that you, and me as well, that we try and struggle and do our best and follow after God with all that we have. And I hope and pray that Jesus would make us blessed children of God. Thanks.